U.S. companies led by LG have been really leaders in this containerized. They're able to deal with fire suppression if a fire breaks out. This is a really remarkable.
Why Korea has a steel industry, shipbuilding, and auto industry, because some 30, 40, 50 years ago, that was the strategy for the country, and they moved in that direction. LG started producing LFP cells in North America last year, so we're the first large-scale battery.
우리는 보통 미국 하면 모든 돈과 기술이 다 모여있는 나라라고 생각합니다. 특히 에너지나 첨단 산업 쪽에서는 미국이 앞서가는 게 당연해 보였죠. 그런데 요즘 들려오는 이야기는 조금 다릅니다. 정작 미국 안에서는 전기가 모자라 발을 동동 구르고 물건 만들 기반이 없어서 고민하는 목소리가 터져 나오고 있거든요. 대체 미국 전력망에 무슨 일이 벌어지고 있는 건지 그 속내를 한번 확인해 보겠습니다.
Diverse demand sources, various generation types, more variables to manage. This is happening all at once in real time. ESS is what makes that manageable. Think of it in three simple roles. First, it balances supply and demand, storing power when there is a surplus, releasing it when there is shortage. Electricity cannot easily be stored in the traditional grid. It has to be used the moment it is produced. When supply and demand fall out of sync, even briefly, the consequences ripple across the system. ESS changes the equation. It acts as a buffer, absorbing excess power during low demand periods and injecting it back during peak hours. This is especially critical as more intermittent sources like solar and wind enter the grid. Second, it keeps the grid stable, responding in milliseconds when frequency or voltage fluctuates before the problem cascades. When the amount of electricity people are using doesn't match what power plants are making, the grid starts to wobble. Traditional power plants can change their output, but they take seconds to minutes to ramp up or down, which is often too slow to stop a problem from growing. By contrast, ESS watches the grid in real time and can push power in or pull power out in a tiny fraction of a second, quickly stabilizing the system before a small issue turns into a major outage. And third, it absorbs shocks. During extreme weather, equipment failures, or sudden demand spikes, ESS buys the grid time to recover and adjust. It does not solve the problem permanently, but it prevents a manageable disruption from becoming a catastrophic one.
전력망이 불안하면 정전 같은 큰 사고로 이어질 수 있습니다. 그래서 이걸 실시간으로 잡아주는 저장 장치가 핵심이 된 건데요. 그런데 이 저장 장치를 만드는 과정에서 생각지도 못한 문제가 터지기 시작합니다.
As ESS becomes central to grid operations, it also becomes central to energy security. Think about what that means in practice. If a country's grid dependence on battery components it does not manufacture, software it did not program, and supply chains it does not have control over, then its energy system becomes vulnerable to those external dependencies. Supply chain disruptions, foreign control over key technologies, cyber vulnerabilities, these are no longer theoretical risks. They are active considerations in how governments and utilities are making procurement decisions today. A resilient grid requires not just capacity, but control over the technologies that enable it. This shift has created a new set of strategic priorities. Energy security is no longer just about where energy comes from. It is also about how the systems that store and deliver it are built, and who controls that process. Battery supply chains have real and specific vulnerabilities. Start with raw materials. Batteries require critical minerals, lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite. More importantly, the processing and refining of these minerals into battery-grade material is heavily concentrated in a very small number of countries. Owning the mine is one thing, but controlling supply chain that follows is another. If this is left unaddressed, these dependencies may become risks, not just for the industry, but to the grid itself. This is why investment across the full value chain matters. not just in finished batteries, but in the materials and components within them. This is exactly what LG is doing. LG is not only producing batteries in the United States, but also investing in upstream, building one of the largest cathode manufacturing facilities in the country. Building energy security means building the entire foundation, from materials to manufacturing.
에너지 안보라는 말이 어렵게 들리지만 사실 내 집 전기를 관리하는 열쇠를 남에게 맡겼느냐의 문제입니다. 특히 배터리 부품이나 소프트웨어를 외국에 의존하면 상황이 나빠졌을 때 속수무책으로 당할 수밖에 없거든요. 그래서 지금 미국은 소재부터 생산까지 전부 직접 갖추려고 마음이 급해진 상황입니다.
Problems and really dilemmas, I think, for everyone. Because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the disruption of Russian gas supplies to Europe, Europe had to stop relying on piped-in Russian gas and to start buying liquefied natural gas, which actually, by the way, Qatar had been mostly selling to Japan and Korea, and the United States sort of stepped in and brokered at the time an arrangement to allow for modification of those contracts so the gas could go from Qatar to Europe. And of course, also some additional gas from the US to Europe. Now that gas is not really getting out of Qatar, and it's going to put the Europeans in a terrible bind. It's going to put certainly Asian economies also into a terrible bind. And, I'm sure we're going to see, governments in Japan and Korea kind of, leaning into nuclear, and for that matter, leaning into coal, because there are going to be a few other options. And I think we'll see, frankly, the Europeans doing the same to try to get through this tough spot that we find ourselves in.
Now I want to move to Vanessa and really ask you about another dimension of the context around this. Basically, I want to ask about policy in the United States. Of course, you're coming at it from a clean energy perspective, but we've had this policy transition around energy from a focus on energy transition to a focus on energy dominance.
미국 정부의 정책이 에너지 전환에서 에너지 우위로 바뀌었다는 건 결국 누가 더 힘이 센지를 따지겠다는 뜻입니다. 그런데 정작 현장에서는 이 정책 때문에 괴로운 소리가 나옵니다.
Wind still faces lots of challenges, but that's probably difficult one to get over. And in terms of sort of the biggest headwinds for us, other than those, are tariffs. So like most American manufacturers, the tariffs that really prove the most challenging for us are under Section 232, is a specific tariff program that's industry specific and commodity specific. With many of my manufacturing trade association friends, we are just troubled by the 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports and the breadth of products that are touched by that tariff. It's not a tariff just on commodity grade steel and aluminum. It's a tariff on basically everything that has steel and aluminum in it. Everything that we import for clean energy has steel and aluminum attached to it somehow. I know that's true for some of the battery products as well. So that tariff and that sort of suite of tariffs that comes under 232, which affects steel, aluminum, copper, potentially polysilicon products, wind turbines, robotics, industrial machinery. It's just a very difficult set of tariffs to navigate, particularly for manufacturers. So I would say that's the sort of single biggest headwind that we face and that we sort of worry about. And I think overall, just the fact that we have this sort of continuing impact of tariffs that affect everybody who's importing anything, to be replaced soon. The IEEPA tariffs obviously not going to be used anymore, but probably pretty quickly replaced by the 301 tariffs. So there's sort of a continuing threat from the tariff sort of headwind that we face in terms of it being problematic for us. So I would say overall, all hope is not lost. Sometimes I meet people and I tell them what I do and they're like, sad face emoji. Like your life must be so hard. My life is really interesting. Work is really challenging, but I think we're feeling pretty good about the future. My industry, like many industries, takes the long view. We don't think in 2-year cycles. We think in 5 and 10-year cycles, and our projects are built to last 20 to 25 years. So that's long past current administration and even the administration after that. So we tend to think the long view, and we tend to feel very optimistic about the future, being realistic about the challenges that we face.
관세 부담 때문에 제조 투자가 어렵다는 하소연이 쏟아집니다. 정작 물건을 만들어야 기술이 느는데 정책이 자꾸 바뀌니 기업들 입장에서는 갈피를 잡기 힘든 거죠. 그런데 이런 상황에서 중국의 성장 속도를 보면 더 기가 막힙니다.
30 years ago, we generated twice as much energy as China, but 25 years ago. Now, right now, China is generating 3 times the energy that we are. Okay, that means over the last 25 years, they've increased their capacity 7-fold. Right? We've barely increased at all. So we can talk about where the energy comes from, and I think, we're not going to have a debate today about solar versus sun versus or wind versus renewable versus clean coal. I don't even care what it is, but what's clear is in the United States, we have lack of power generation, and it's not competitive. So that, I think, is really the number one topic that we need to address. Part of that comes down to an economic policy, right, that is consistent and coherent from administration to administration. And this is something that you see in China or Korea or Japan. This is why Korea has a steel industry, shipbuilding industry, auto industry, because some 30, 40, 50 years ago, that was the strategy for the country, and they moved in that direction. I feel that we have not had this type of cohesive strategy as a nation, and so we're not addressing these power shortages in a cohesive way. A lot of these data centers we're talking about, the actual companies that are operating data centers are putting in their own power plant, right? Because they're not sure that they're going to get enough power generation. Now, if you can imagine all of these data centers around the country and everybody's building their own power plant, that's probably not the most efficient grid that you can imagine, right? If you have a centralized planning and you invest properly, and then you figure out who needs that demand and you deploy it, you're probably going to end up with a much more efficient system. And we're not talking about that right now, and we need to, right? So that's really.
국가가 큰 그림을 그리지 않고 기업들이 각자 알아서 발전소를 짓고 있는 상황. 이게 지금 미국의 현실이라는 겁니다. 참 낯설죠. 전력망이라는 기본 체계조차 제대로 못 잡고 있는 모습입니다.
And so I actually want to follow up by asking Bob a little bit about what makes Korea a good partner in that context of increasing energy demand and the competition in China, and how do you see the energy sector in the context of the relationship?
I think it's critical. Now, Korea is a democracy based on rule of law. There's corporations, I think, make decisions based on what would be conventionally acceptable. So I think you have trustworthy partners, some of them in this room. But I think, and a lot of Korean companies have also invested in U.S. heavily because I think Korean companies view U.S. as the most important partner that they have. I think combination of those things, make Korean companies and Korea may be a good partner for addressing some of these issues. I think, again, this goes back to having a very cohesive policy. Battery companies just don't show up, right, and appear. A lot of the Asian companies have really dominated the battery space. I think out of that group, Korean companies have been willing to invest more, work more closely with U.S. partners. And we've also built out more of a supply chain or a value chain outside of China than any other ecosystem. So I think all of those things, contribute, very well to us being a good partner. But like I keep going back, we need a cohesive policy to help build battery manufacturing here in the U.S. Right, and there's some things that I think OBBA did a good job with, but there's other things that we need to do more. So I think everybody here and most Korean companies I'm familiar with are so willing to work with the U.S. And I think it's just a matter of having a consistent approach that we can all, work on.
미국 입장에서 한국 기업들이 왜 좋은 협력 대상인지는 명확합니다. 기술이 좋아서가 아니라 믿고 맡길 수 있는 상식적인 기준을 가졌기 때문입니다. 게다가 한국은 이미 중국 말고도 부품을 구할 수 있는 길을 넓게 뚫어놓은 상태죠. 미국이 지금 가장 가려워하는 부분을 정확히 긁어줄 수 있는 셈입니다.
Explain FIAC.
Oh, FIAC. Yeah. Sorry. FIAC is a foreign entity of concern, which is just a euphemism for China, basically. I mean, the other people on the list we're not trading with. We don't trade with North Korea. So yeah, FIAC, basically, when you see FIAC, you could just scratch it out and put China. But the idea that, all of our companies have had serious conversations over the last year since the BBB bill passed about what their entanglements with Chinese ownership, Chinese technology, Chinese intellectual property, all of those issues are being discussed. And honestly, the companies have done a really good job at sort of gently removing those entanglements. I think it's fair to say, really, really thoughtful about how they're doing it. The problem, of course, is that Chinese continue to be at the cutting edge of these developments. But what I would say, Scott, is you don't innovate if you're not making things. When I come from a family of car manufacturers, and one of the things I learned is you innovate on the factory floor. The reason manufacturing is a superpower is because people make things better when they're making them. And this is something that I think is truly one of the benefits of having more reshored manufacturing is we will get better at doing the kinds of things that we do really well, because we're really good at innovating, actually. But you need to be sleeves rolled up, dealing with the technology before you can innovate. And then the challenge will be keeping the innovation to ourselves. We're really sharers. Americans share everything. I mean, if you think about what we did with solar technology 20 years ago, we sort of developed cutting edge technology and then we gave it to everyone because our thinking was the world should have this because it'll make the world a better place. And that is something we need to rethink. Giving away technology or having it easily stolen is probably not a way to build a dominant position in these markets. So I think the combination of being better at manufacturing and innovating and keeping that information in a national security sense, more close hold, not giving it to everyone.
결국 직접 만들어 봐야 기술이 늡니다. 책상 앞에 앉아 설계도만 본다고 해서 공장이 척척 돌아가는 게 아니거든요. 미국이 과거에 기술을 너무 쉽게 나눠줬던 일을 후회하며 다시 팔을 걷어붙이려는 이유가 바로 여기 있습니다.
Oh, you don't have to get too technical because then I won't understand, but try to give us something.
Well, one simple thing I would say is that LG started producing LFP cells in North America last year. So we're the first large-scale battery manufacturer.
I have to ask you to tell us LFP.
Oh, lithium iron phosphate. So when you hear about lithium batteries, you'll probably very often hear about two different chemistries. One is LFP, lithium iron phosphate, and the other one is nickel manganese cobalt oxide, NMC. So you'll hear a lot of things about nickel, manganese, cobalt. So the NMC chemistry is very good for energy density. So you can pack a lot of energy into a small amount of weight and space. This is very good for automotive applications, right? Because you have to carry the battery pack with you. So you need it to be very efficient. LFP chemistry is an alternative chemistry, iron phosphate. Iron and phosphate are both readily available, very cheap. So that chemistry tends to have less energy density, but lower cost. And for energy storage systems, you don't need to move the battery packs around. So the weight is a little bit less of a factor. And that's why LFP proved to be the dominant chemistry for ESS space. Most of that was coming out of Chinese manufacturers, and we're the first ones to manufacture it here in the US. So that is a very big step. On top of the chemistry, I would say there's a lot of innovations on how you containerize these solutions and have fireproofing and battery management systems from safety point of view and efficiency point of view. So it's really from cell all the way out to the large scale infrastructure projects where now we're doing it in a very containerized way, spaced out, with certain fireproofing mechanisms. So it's really innovation all the way up and down that value chain.
그동안 LFP 배터리 시장은 사실상 중국의 동무대였습니다. 그런데 LG가 북미에서 이 배터리를 직접 생산하기 시작했다는 건 미국 입장에서 정말 큰 변화입니다. 이제는 중국 눈치를 보지 않고도 대안을 찾을 수 있게 됐으니까요.
You may hear about things like solid state and other very exotic batteries that are coming down the line, but that's really reserved for different type of applications.
Want to add something, Vanessa?
I thank God every day I don't have to worry about nickel and cobalt because we are all LFP all the time. It is a challenge. You're exactly right. I mean, what you choose does dictate how many challenges you'll have to deal with. And if anyone knows anything about the cobalt situation, you will appreciate why I'm happy to be not making those kind of batteries. But I also think your point about the containerized solution is really important. That the fact that U.S. companies led by LG have been really leaders in this containerized solution. So these batteries are like Legos. They get put in big box, looks like a shipping container. I would argue the most important aspect of that is that containerized system provides a lot of protection for the system. Batteries are put in very hostile environments, cold, heat. These systems are able to cool them. They're able to deal with fire suppression if a fire breaks out. This is a really remarkable achievement. And honestly, that is what is enabling our companies to walk away from CATL and other companies. That was historically what the Chinese producers did very well. Now that we have US produced solutions, that is what everyone would prefer. So I think that is a big innovation, and you deserve a lot of credit for being leaders in that. Because if you look at any energy storage project today, the system that Bob is talking about is the system you will see. Big containerized boxes that are basically really protecting not just the project, but protecting people. In the event that there is a fire, those systems are really good at protecting anyone near the containerized solution from getting hurt or getting subject to anything. So we've been working really hard on that. It's part of our safety program at ACP, and very much appreciate the manufacturers' work on that as well.
배터리를 만드는 수준을 넘어 불이 나도 안전하게 지켜주는 컨테이너형 저장 장치로 성과를 내고 있습니다. 이제 미국 업계에서도 한국의 이런 실질적인 제조 능력에 주목하기 시작했습니다.
Been investing in the United States, spanning from natural gas to crude oil to diamond manufacturing. And, it's really interesting because it's really a double-edged sword in some ways, because there's an advantage to having these opportunities and having the government being involved, maybe creating some of these opportunities. But in other ways, you may be getting in too deep, because a lot of these projects span multiple years, could span across multiple administrations. We see different priorities with maybe renewable energy or traditional energy sources. So first, I'd love to hear your thoughts on implications on what Korean firms will kind of look towards as after the Japanese have been investing. And I guess for Bob especially, I'd love to hear maybe your thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of maybe that double-edged sword, whether having that opportunity to invest versus maybe getting in too deep and aligning too hard with the administration. Thanks.
We'll go ahead and answer that and then go to the last question. So, Bob?
There's trade discussions happening between countries, and I think the current administration is asking for significant investment both from Japan and Korea. And I think it points to the fact that they're good partners, that there's trust, but there's also financial ability to do some of that investment. I think for us, for LG Energy Solution, we actually moved a little bit earlier than everyone. As I mentioned, we started in 2010. We already have 8 plants in the ground, which are, about $5 billion each. So we've been bullish on this market for a long time. We are committed to this market. So in some ways, we feel like we're very much aligned with what the Trump administration, even Biden administration before, this movement toward local production and being in the market for the market. I feel like we've been very consistent with that, so it hasn't been so much of a challenge for us.
오늘 에너지 저장 장치와 전력망을 둘러싼 미국의 고민, 그리고 한국 기업들의 활약을 보며 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 자국 내 제조 기반이 약해져 불안해하는 미국과 수십 년 전부터 국가적인 계획을 세워 철강, 조선 자동차, 그리고 이제는 배터리까지 묵묵히 실력을 쌓아온 대한민국의 모습이 대비됩니다. 자원 하나 없는 나라에서 사람 머리 쓰고 땀 흘려 버텨내며 이제는 상대가 먼저 손을 내미는 위치가 되었습니다. 이것이야말로 대한민국의 진짜 저력 아닐까요? 오늘 영상을 보며 시청자 여러분들은 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 오늘 영상은 여기까지입니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다.